This is Duke University.
When we are called upon to defend the humanities, not from the productive mutual encroachments of consensual interdisciplinarity, but, say, against the growing instrumentalization of university education, we fall back, not at all surprisingly, on the language of humanism, or, as I perhaps idiosyncratically define it, the logic of sameness and difference. The humanities are essential, we argue, because they are about that which makes us human. Lest this sound like simple species narcissism, we insist that the commitment to investigating our exceptionalism is also fundamentally ethical. To study the human condition is necessarily, we say, to investigate how we encounter the other, including the most vulnerable among and beyond us. I want to offer in this paper an immanent defense of the humanities, one which gratefully deploys humanist methodologies, but is passionately detached from the foundational humanist principle of sameness and difference. I wonder what it might look like if we, in the face of challenge, cared a little bit less about our own survival. Instead of a full-throttled resistance to oblivion, as Judith Butler recently put it in her defense of the humanities, can we imagine a passionate detachment from humanism and from any simple recourse to an always necessarily exclusionary human commons? I want to propose instead of the humanist anthropological morality of sameness and difference, an immanent ethic of indifference. As I say below, I do not mean indifference as such, but indifference to difference, which is also the same as indifference to the same. I argue that this is where the critique of humanism, which we sometimes perhaps unhelpfully gloss as post-humanism, referring to our conversation earlier this morning, where that brings us. What follows is a tale from my fieldwork, which I might call Love and Other Injustices. There is a story people tell, perhaps apocryphal, but nevertheless apropos. The story is set on a lonely stretch of road in North India. A bull from a nearby farm is hit by a speeding lorry and is thrown onto another man's land. The sound of the bull's cries brings people from neighboring houses to see, most of who are disturbed by the animal's injuries. He needs to be shot, which someone is ready to do, but the owner of the land upon which the bull has fallen refuses, citing his adherence to ahimsa. This is his property, and he won't be responsible for the bull's death. He tells the assembled to move the bull the 10 feet it would take to remove him from his land and off of his hands, and then they can shoot him. But this is an impossible task. The bull is bloody, broken, and afraid. Also, he is a bull. The solution is to call someone with a vehicle and push the animal off of this man's land and onto the road. In the hours it takes to find this car with a willing driver and amidst the slow attrition of people who have other things to do, the bull eventually dies. It is not the bull's ultimate death that is of concern in these tellings. Rather, the story is about indifference, about ahimsa, not as an injunction to act mercifully or compassionately or act at all, but as an abnegation of responsibility, a moral hygienic practice of washing one's hands of. Indifference is complicated here, though, since the landowner is neither affectively indifferent, i.e. apathetic, or averse to differentiation. He is far from indifferent when it comes to wresting himself from other, a self that includes, of course, his property. But beyond that self, all is sort of undifferentiated, equally a possible stain, someone else's concern. When animal activists tell this story, or another one like it, it's for a host of reasons. To assail religious hypocrisy, particularly through an immanent critique of Hinduism, to separate an ethic of non-injury from the prevalence of suffering, indeed to attribute the prevalence of suffering to an ethic of non-injury, to point out the selfishness of men, both gendered and general. But most of all, it is a lament against passivity and a call for a more positive ethic of action. What I want to suggest, though, is that this positive ethic of action, when mobilized as, conflated with, or dismissed as love, becomes the very same thing as its supposed antithesis. The practice of indifference, which is instead called an ethic of non-injury, looks a lot like the politics of distinction, which we instead insist on calling love. My gambit in a nutshell is this: that love is an injustice, because when we love, it is the one or ones who are special to us that we save. But that is not always the case. In India, I knew a family called the Abrams Myers, hale and healthy people from the Pacific Northwest. In addition to being sturdy and strong, they have big hearts too, ones always ready to bleed. Jim and his wife Erica found themselves in India a few years after their daughter Claire was born and decided to move there permanently and start an animal shelter in Udaipur. They sold their house in Seattle, took Claire out of school, and founded Animal Aid. When I spent a week with them about 2 years ago, they were in the middle of moving. The original shelter had grown too small for all the three-legged dogs and paralyzed pigs and nighttime car accident cow emergencies. And not only had they leased a large new plot of land for the animals, but were building their home right in the middle of it. No longer, as it had been, would there be any distance between them and all that need, them and all of that labor. We were chatting one day about this, and Erica said something that I found very funny at the time. She remarked on what it meant to have brought her, quote, pink baby to work on an animal shelter and be faced every day with terrible examples of cruelty and neglect. Now, of course, Jim and I called her out immediately on how racist it sounded that she was lamenting bringing her pink baby to India and all of that, and she was very mortified. But I want to think that there's another interpretation there as well. Something else that's there. And that something else is about taking something you love, something that is entrusted to you, and putting it in the way of harm. Claire is an amazing young woman who, during a difficult time, used all of the money from her grandmother's inheritance to keep the shelter afloat. Jim tried to dissuade her, but she would have none of it, and this eats at him still. Their project is her lifetime's burden. It is impossible to imagine that even decades from now, she will feel like she has done her part and can leave the animals and start a different kind of life. As it is, she always feels she isn't doing enough, that for every moment carrying a dog or mending a donkey's leg, she isn't breaking into a lab or doing undercover work in a slaughterhouse. Animal activists talk about this sometimes, this descent into obligation. There is an actress in Hyderabad called Amla. She's been working for animals for the last 20-odd years. She told me once, though only after I inadvertently pressed her, about the, quote, dark hour of the soul that every activist goes through, of how working with animals is a, quote, never-ending, bottomless ocean. Timmy Kumar, who directs a renowned shelter in Jaipur, says she has to simply shut herself down sometimes, or she would, quote, drown from knowing too much. She has been doing this for decades, but I have to stop now, she said. I just must. I didn't want to do nothing, but somehow nothing became everything, and I started to drown. One can stop, or one can drown. Or there is a third solution, the one that most of us choose, which is to love, to differentiate, to do as the propertied man with the bull, and to make a fortress island of ourselves and our own, beyond which and in whose interest there are limits to what we can be asked to do. This is what haunts Abrams, that he failed to build an island, and now his child will almost surely drown. Love, then, despite its obfuscating romanticist reputation, is an utterly rational act, made necessary by a binary moral logic that pits everything against nothing, retreating from the world versus drowning within it. With love, we know in advance what to save, have in advance the answer to the ethical question, myself, my family, my people, my discipline, and is, in that sense, as Charles Taylor has argued, at the core of a humanist ethic. Without love, there is no morality, he says, as it is our love, read impassioned preference, differentiation, for something, someone, some group or idea that allows us to, quote, live within our moral means, a ground without which we risk being swallowed up by obligation. Love is reason, though it is only when viewed as its alter ego, love is transcendence, that it comes to appear as the very ground or the very spirit of human being. It's surely no surprise that even people who devote their lives to animals are quite attached to narratives of human exceptionalism. There is a woman who works at Animal Aid named Kamla, who, like most of the employees there, lives in a nearby village. One of her tasks is to sit under a tarp that shades the paralyzed dogs and massage them, which she does for nearly 45 minutes each day. And while she does so, she sings to them and pulls out their ticks. I was under the tarp with her one day, refilling bowls of water, and I asked her if she ever wondered why she does work like this, with such sincerity, and others don't. She said she was raised well, and that her parents loved animals, but added after a pause, "Main insan hu," as if being human is precisely what makes it possible for her to love something that it is not, to transcend the bestial order of skin, of instinctive self-enclosure. But in the very next instant, as if recognizing her mistake, she said, "इंसान सब मतलब से करते हैं, जानवर में कोई मतलब नहीं है, जानवर में समझदार होता है, लेकिन मतलब नहीं है." Humans do what they do always with matlab, intention, purpose, self-interest, with some meaning, for some point. Animals are not matlabi, but lest I hear this as a denigration of animals, she clarified that animals, instead of matlab, have samajdar, understanding. So she began by positing love in its vaunted iteration, love is transcendence, but then immediately thought better of it and admitted to love as its compromising alter ego. Love is reason, self-interested. In her rendering, animals, with claims neither to transcendence nor to reason, may not love, but they have understanding. Which of these, it is fair to wonder, is actually the ground for ethics? Love is reason and reasonable, a politics of distinction that, by providing something, rescues us from the twinned abyss of everything versus nothing. And as Elizabeth Pavanelli has argued, the experience of love, the capacity to be subject to that intimate event, to transcendence of one, the bestial order of skin, and two, of genealogical society, is at the heart of the modern humanist endeavor. If love is so much at the soul of humanity, and necessarily then of reasoned being, why in the case of animal activists does love always seem so crazy? The examples of seeming insanity among animal activists are too legion to even attempt to enumerate here. There's the story I tell, the very beginning of animal activism happened because this crazy woman in Australia had an erotic dream about Jawaharlal Nehru, the prime minister, and sent money to him, which then his grandson Sanjay Gandhi actually used and opened an animal shelter and all sorts of interesting things. Then there are the Gaubucks or cow devotees, one of who, the retired Brigadier General Chauhan, who we talked about last night, drinks cow urine like it's beer, will sometimes for fun eat off the ground with his cows on his hands and knees, and administers uncannily accurate horoscopes based on intel that he receives in his dreams from cows. And then there are the hoarders, usually women, who instead of loving too much have precisely failed to love, failed to discriminate, like Amita Singh in the northern mountainous state of Uttaranchal, who rescues animals destined for sacrifice, or, far more often, takes in animals who, priced too high by greedy brokers at festival time, could not be purchased whole, and so had a leg or two cut off instead. Her small house is full of such bandaged and infected, half-dead animals, and the urea is so strong that it burns your eyes, and it's better to sleep outside, despite the gruesomely tortured animals that locals throw onto her property as a threat. Or there's Leela Parulekar in Pune, former heiress of the Pawar clan, a clan that includes the political strongman Sharad Pawar, who also descended into madness and therefore illness, all the urine-soaked mattresses and feces-stained floors in constant encounter with suffering. The issue here, I think, is less about madness and more about what is culturally and politically attributed to love. All those who read Indian papers are familiar with the phrase animal lover. It goes back in India at least as far as 1950, when the Hindu newspaper ran a story on Jawaharlal Nehru strolling a zoo, assuring animal lovers that their leaders had a soft spot for furry creatures, because, of course, animal lovers have no other concerns related to their prime minister or national governance. The phrase, needless to say, infantilizing, feminizing, dismissive, is now ubiquitous, used to represent people who oppose mass dog culling, to those who rescue livestock from illegal transport, to those who protest KFCs, to the neighborhood auntie who feeds dogs at the street corner. What work does this attribution of love do? Why, even in a context as different as the anti-abolitionist movement in North America and its concept of the quote-unquote nigger lover, is the deliberate confusion of love and ethics so politically and psychically powerful? For one thing, it reveals the lover's love as a failed affect. The animal lover's love lacks distinction. It is only categorical, all animals, and like any category, is one so unstable that can never serve the rational and thus covert purpose of love, which is to safely mediate the twin dualisms of ontology and genealogy, everything and nothing. By calling it love, you show that it is no kind of love at all. But secondly, if love, which we now have to forget is a categorical love, and so an irrational love that is therefore no kind of love at all, if love is the ground for animal ethics, then it is also no kind of ethics at all, for it is neither normative, love and ought have no truck with each other, nor is it premised on practical judgment. You either are someone who loves animals, or you don't. Calling a politics love is to evacuate it of its ethical content. To leave it stranded is simultaneously irrational, not because it's love, but because it's categorical and thus failed, and idiosyncratically singular. Love in its guise not of reason, but of transcendence. There are activists who vigorously reject that love has anything to do with their politics, who in fact see the wild-haired neighborhood aunties and the hoarders and the cow devotees as a terrible contagion that must be kept at bay with clear-headed rationality or with cultivated spiritual indifference. But those rejections can only fall flat, for they forget that love, when not failed, the capacity to have it and to receive it, remains the key humanist currency, the very ground for mutual recognition. And so to claim, as one does, that she has, quote, set her heart in stone and acts, quote, not out of love, but out of a deep sense of rage and grief, does not help matters. And to claim, as another does, that he registers no difference between a maggot and a boy and a cow and a dog, does not help matters. There are those who reject, but there are also those who embrace the language and role of the heart. There is a man named Pummy, for instance, from a wealthy North Indian family who, a bit of a good-for-nothing growing up, was loaned a large plot of land in the once holy region of Kurukshetra by his older brother to start a chicken hatchery. This was in '96, just on the cusp of a big government and corporate-backed boom in the poultry industry, and Pummy profited handsomely. Years later, he was invited by a friend to go on an all-expenses-paid trip by the Humane Society to the United States to visit cage-free poultry farms. He accepted, came back, and, as he said to me, unable to stomach the conditions of his own facility any longer, sold his farm at a loss and became an advocate for cage-free farming. He has had no success convincing other farmers to leave the conglomerates to which they are deeply indebted and start other kinds of farming practices, nor did any of the others who participated in the American boondoggle implement any changes. He gave me all the economic reasons for this, all solidly convincing, but then he added, "Ye sab andar se aana hoga," tapping his chest. It's inside of you, or it's not. I'm also reminded then of a letter I read from a woman in West Bengal who wrote to Maneka Gandhi in 2001, asking her to stop an impending sacrifice. "I am again requesting you to hide out my name and address," she wrote. "Let the animal lover to survive first, then only the animal can be saved." If love is an injustice because when we love it is the one or ones who are special to us that we save, then in this ontology of andar se aana hoga, love is an injustice because, by virtue of our love, it is we who must be saved. If indifference alone is injustice, and distinction is injustice, what am I suggesting might be an alternative ground for ethics? That concept is indifference to difference. I first came upon this in a formulation I wrote in a paper I wrote some years ago on queer friendship in India. I was arguing that friendship is today a sort of residual ethic, once more central, that was pushed aside, disappeared even, by the rise of a politics of recognition. Following Leela Gandhi in her book Affective Communities, I saw friendship as a radical contrapuntal politics that rejected xenophobia, a statist politics rooted in enmity, through its practice of philoxenia, a love of difference, a love for the other, precisely because it's other. But I realized as I was working this through that xenophobia and philoxenia are not opposites at all, but are actually the same thing, an attachment to xenos, an attachment to the existence of difference. And of course, homophilia is no different. A love for sameness is necessarily rooted in an attachment to the existence of difference. What I wanted to say about the ideal of queer friendship, as an ethnographer of queer activism, but also as a queer friend myself, was something else. Friendship as ethic is neither disdain for difference nor its desire, but actually indifference to difference. Same or different, strange or familiar, I wrote at the time. We are ready to be made more ourselves or something new. The ethos of this is a kind of mutual estrangement, the commitment, or at least willingness, to be strange to oneself and to and with another, such that the ground for ethics is not the rational, categorical, but only ever the immanent. Thank you.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.